Merrimack TV is committed to our community. From gavel-to-gavel coverage of town and school board meetings to updates on town services and projects, we aim to keep you connected.
Good morning, I'm Kyle Fox, Public Works Director for the town of Merrimack.
Hi, I'm Diane Trippett. I'm the town clerk tax collector for the town of Merrimack.
I'm Captain Matt Tarleton with the Merrimack, New Hampshire Police Department.
And keep the public informed of every motion.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
And many moments, so you can be confident that we're here for you. Thanks for watching. Stay connected. Follow Merrimack TV on Facebook.
Good evening. Welcome to the Tuesday, January 12th, 2021 special meeting of the Merrimack School Board. Please remember to take your microphones off mute and rise to join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is public participation guidelines for remote learning. Because we are remote, we can't take live testimony. So anyone who wants to send any public comments, please send them in the following way. You may send an email to publiccomments@sau26.org. Again, that email address is publiccomments@sau26.org. We do require your name and address for the record on such documentation. Based on the amount of information we received tonight, our goal is always to read off verbatim the comments as we receive them. If the comments become too heavy in volume, we would just have to not read public comment into testimony. It's really an all or nothing proposition. Regardless, we will put all public comments in our minutes for tonight's meeting, but we would just not be able to read them tonight if we can't read all of them. Up until just recently, that had never happened, and it's only happened once to date. I just like to be sure to address this up front in case we find ourselves in that position. Thank you. The next item is public participation. Shannon, do we have any public participation emails that we can read at this time?
Yes, Cindy, we did receive one Friday, January 8th. Hello, school personnel. As MYA president and school facilities contact, I asked, what is the current thinking regarding recreational sports for the kids this winter? Will the school gyms be available with the 119 reopening? I certainly realize there are more pressing matters for you folks, but providing a recreation outlet for the kids may be an important part of their physical and mental health and wellness. MYA's current plan is to start our winter sports, in parentheses basketball and wrestling, on Saturday, January 23rd, using all the COVID safety protocols, in parentheses temp checks, limited spectators, hand sanitizer, mask, etc., end parentheses. Please consider and advise. Thank you, John Calabro, MYA President, 16 Hutchinson Road, Merrimack.
Thank you. And that was the only one you said, right? Just the one?
That's one that came in last Friday, actually.
Okay, great. Thank you. We'll move on to the next agenda item then, and that is the review of the temporary emergency policy, the travel guidance for students and staff. I put this on the agenda because it's come to my attention that this current document may not be consistent with the HHS guidelines for the state. So I wanted to be able to review this with the school board to see if there's any necessary changes that might need to be made. At this time, I'm going to just turn it over to Andy Schneider as he had drafted up a proposed change that I'd like to share with you and further discuss.
Sure. Tell me when you can see my screen.
I can see it.
And can you hear me?
And I can hear you.
Okay, great. So really quick, what I'll share is a couple of things here. So a little backtrack. So the correspondence that we got was not really the whole policy, but what really was focused on is what the definition of essential travel was. In particular, the state has loosened their definition of what essential travel is to allow parents and students that want to do college visits, for example, to be able to do that and have that sort of categorized. So if we look at our policy, which is what I'm sharing here, this is policy EBCVT, the temporary emergency travel. We on the very first page, this second bullet, which I'll highlight, it talks about personal international travel, and then it talks about essential travel. Now, we in this policy chose to define essential travel at the point in time, matching what the DHHS website talked about. This link at the top is that site that the DHHS has, which is a living document for them that they change. If I go to that page, and I look down on page, it does all the definition of all the different aspects of travel. But what they've done, and more pertinent to this discussion, is they've changed the definition of essential travel. And if you look in the middle of the page here, sort of where my cursor is, it defines essential travel as essential travel includes for work, school, personal safety, medical care, care of others, parental shared custody, and I'll go on and on. But essentially, it's a much broader scope of what essential travel is than what they'd originally done back in the September timeframe. So instead of trying to reopen this entire policy, I thought sort of what my proposal was, let's make a simple change to the policy to allow this expanded definition of essential travel, to at least allow parents to be able to do the to do the travel they need to do for traveling to schools and college visits and things like that. So my proposal is, and I just put up a Word doc. So the current policy wording, and this is that second dot that I showed in the policy, where we define essential travel, which is highlighted here in the middle. What I've proposed is in this second paragraph is to change it to say essential travel for the purposes of this policy will defer to the definition as described in the state's DHHS travel guidance at, and then put the link. Now, this is the same link earlier in the doc, but as far as sort of consistency, I chose it here. In this way, if somebody wants to understand what essential travel is within our policy, it defers to this living document that the DHHS has to allow this more extended. The idea I had was not to change anything else in our policy that may describe in terms of how the reporting structure is and things like that, because I think that is something that we don't necessarily want to change, because it sort of matches what the approach is within the district to when people do travel and the cautions about quarantine and things like that. But I think the intent of this change is to simply just open up the definition to allow these sort of visits to occur. So that's sort of the proposal that I had. So that I'll stop.
Thank you, Andy. Thanks for running through that with us. Does anyone have any comments or questions or thoughts specifically regarding this update? I mean, my recollection was at the time we put this in place that we did really want to mirror what was being required in the state as it relates to what's required for our staff and students. But I will go ahead and open it up for discussion. Any comments, questions?
Shannon's got her hand up.
I can't, yeah, I've got it.
You can expand the window to see all the different people if you want to. So.
Yes. Shannon.
Honestly, I just got your screen just now because my Zoom froze. I never did see your screen share, and you couldn't see me not being able to see it. But that said, I just asked, based on the recommended language, was there any way in, because I did have to drop out for me to drop back in, was there any language that would be prohibitive or conflicting with best practices that we've had in the district just to keep operations as functional as they've been?
Well, I think I'll give you my impression of this. In reading,
I'm asking administration if they could weigh in on how their operations will be, if their operations can sustain to the quality that they have with this language that you've proposed.
Okay. Yeah, no, I appreciate the question and the consideration for the management of the district. And no, this does not compete with those practices, particularly as Andy was talking about not really opening up or touching any other part. That's big for us because, we really have been trying to be consistent and strict in our interpretation of rules for all the reasons that we've said for months and months. And in some cases, our district has been maybe, in excess of some actual technical requirements, because we've been, quite well known for being pretty strict on these matters. But to your particular question, this suggestion I think is a good one, and it does not put us in any peril more than we are already in when it comes to this issue and personnel. So thank you, but no, I don't have a problem. We don't have a problem.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments?
I'll go back and just show the policy again. So again, that would just replace in this paragraph here the rest of the policy, which is fairly short. It's not overly broad in terms of what, but the policies of what students and what the duration and how long it is. I mean, the way I read this is that over time, as more vaccinations are out and things over time may change, we could revisit this policy at any point in time. But right now, just because of what's occurring and what visits going to be happening, I think this is a prudent change just to really focus just the change in definition. So this doesn't mean we can't go back in a month and look at this again if something else changed. But for now, this is what I think we should do.
And this will allow students to be able to do college visits, or teachers or staff to be able to do college visits with their children?
Yeah, because if you look at the definition on the DHS website, brief trips take essential travel also includes travel students and their parents and guardians who are visiting institutions of higher learning or preparatory high schools as potential future students, including allowing the students to remain at the school for overnight stays. So it's very specific to that.
Okay, good.
What you just stated. Yep.
All right, good. I mean, I'm happy with that.
Cinda, could I just say one thing? So, it's always been the case that, when essential travel was limited to, work or safety or medical care, whatever it is, I just want to remind people that right now, we're experiencing a real jump in the state and a real jump in Merrimack. If you look at Merrimack active cases over the last several weeks, we've gone from a more recent low of 76 to, I believe it's 166 today in just less than a couple of weeks. So, I just want to make sure that people understand that even though this change, which we support, is consistent with DHHS, the risk of travel, no matter for what reason, is still there. And I just want to remind people that, that when you come back, even if, you're allowed to be exempt from certain restrictions because of you're fall into an essential category as opposed to leisure or whatever, that doesn't change what you might be exposed to, and it doesn't change what you might be bringing back. And, we're developing a plan for a second semester right now that's once again going to be predicated on, a best case scenario for the availability of our employees and so on. So, we're working hard to try to create the conditions for school to be open. So I just want to make sure that people understand that. So, this would allow for travel that the policy didn't allow for before, but it doesn't change the potential risk that brings back to the district that we're trying to, reopen. So anyway, just worth saying again.
So, yeah, and obviously, I mean, the good news is I think one of the reasons I actually did a little research on this. The state felt that the colleges and universities, et cetera, that students are going to have similar sort of safety protocols in place. It's not like they're going to go to a rock concert or some other thing like that. This is a very limited focused area, and colleges doing the same thing. So the hope is, and the reason they made this change is that hopefully that all parties are doing sort of the same level of caution that we are. So I think it's the spirit of it is to really allow this to happen with everything that you said, obviously being careful and stuff. So since I got the floor, I'd like to make a motion that we as a board, since this policy has been read multiple times, and what we're doing is wanting to just change a phrase in it to refer to an existing link that we've got, I'd like to make a motion that we take this proposed change that I've done, get the wording in the policy, and make this change effective right away as opposed to going through a multi-week process. So that's the motion I'd like to make.
I second it.
Any other comments or questions?
I don't know if you can see me.
I can, Jenna.
Okay. I was just going to say, having a senior that has at previous to school starting gone on an out-of-state college visit, Andy, you're right. Their protocols are so strict there that it's almost more so than anything here, even at our schools. I mean, you can't almost get near anyone. So I think that you're right, Andy, and I think it's safe, and I think this is a very smart move. And I also think parents are smart. They don't want their kids to be sick, and they don't want their kids to miss school, so they're going to do everything they can to keep their kids healthy and following protocols. So, yeah.
Shannon.
I want to take a comparable approach, but I think we want to take a parallel approach. And that is, it's something that we talked about a few months ago, and I think it was something that Mark wanted to do, and we should have done, maybe we should have done. And that is, we should accept it tonight, but we should put it on our next agenda because we have not received public input on a policy change. So this would give 2 weeks for any questions or concerns about the modification of the policy to be received. So, and that's just something that by doing it this way, we've cut the public out of it, even though they're the ones that literally are going to be needing this policy the most. So any feedback or concerns, we're sending, our kids to colleges. I'm not saying this is the wrong policy either. So I just be clear on that. I'm fairly agreeable to it, but we've never not taken public input on policies that would impact student welfare. And I think that we just having it back on the agenda to enacting it, and then putting it back on the agenda to make sure that there's no further public input specific to that, I think would be, I'd be a little more comfortable with.
Lori, and then Andy.
So what I understood that you said is that we're going to approve it, but we'll still offer the public if they want input, and we can so right now, if someone needs to have a tour of a college, they can go based on us approving this, but then we're still offering the public comment.
Right, so that's basically like a conditional approval, so pending public comment. And then we could actually put it on consent in 2 weeks, which we can take anything off consent if further discussion is required, which would be dictated by any public feedback, questions, or concerns on the policy the way it's been adjusted. Does that make sense?
Andy.
Yeah, it does, except my only comment is that our next scheduled meeting is a week from today. So if we can get by with doing it in a week, that would help. I don't know if we need to have the 2 weeks, if there's some guideline that says we must wait 2 weeks, but our next meeting is a week from today.
Then I would also say then, because we do have that short runway, that we would want to put out a notice of the policy adjustment, and any questions or concerns need to be sent to the board prior to Monday. So then we need to do, I'd say, facilitate because we are not going with our practice, our consistent practice. And if we're going to deviate from that, we need to make sure that we have there's any recourse for the public to be able to take to provide the feedback for any questions or concerns they have. Because again, it could be not kids that are going to college, but kids that may have an immune deficiency or have someone at home that does. So again, it's not about the parents who are making the decision to take the children to a college. It also impacts those who aren't, and sending your child to that environment. So I would rather that we had the opportunity to get that public comment, and then of course solicit it because of the short runway where we normally would let our agendas do the talking.
So what about if the motion says we sort of do conditional approval of this change, that we will review it, we will put it on our consent agenda in a week, and we instruct administration to provide this changed, I'll provide this change text to administration, but we also ask that they tomorrow on the district webpage just document what this change is and ask for public comments prior to that meeting. Would that be sufficient, Shannon?
I think it would, but we just want to use our, just throwing it on the webpage is not what I would say soliciting input.
Well, no, I mean the Facebook page, the alert that goes out or whatever we're going to do.
Okay, that I'd be more comfortable with that.
Okay,
So
that's a really long motion now.
Just to be clear though, are we saying that we're temporarily approving until we approve it on consent?
Right, because we have people that might be going to travel for college visits because of the 3-day weekend with Martin Luther King Jr. Day. I expect that there might be people already scheduling that kind of thing. So I don't want to prohibit that, but however, we can if we can solicit that input prior to our next meeting next Tuesday, that'd be ideal.
Yeah, I agree with that. Do you want to amend your motion?
What
Shannon said. What she said.
Okay. So we're going to do a temporary approval or conditional approval, temporary, that to allow this change, that administration will post an updated proposed policy on the webpage, and we will notify in the Facebook, distribute Facebook notification as well as whatever the district chooses to do to notify that this change is there, and that we'll accept comments on this for the next week, and then it will show up on the consent agenda for the meeting for the 19th, which is a week from today.
Will you re-second, Lori?
Yeah, second.
Okay. Any other comments? Are we ready to take a vote? All right, we'll take a vote. All those in favor of Andy's motion, please signify by raising your hand and saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. The motion carries 5-0-0. On to the next item, which is the review of the proposed warrant articles. Before we go ahead and go through those, did Matt or Mark, did you want to speak about those?
No, thank you. I'll defer to you, Cinda, as to how you want to go through these. I think typically Matt has read them, but we've talked about them a little bit already. So I don't have anything additional to add. I don't know, Matt, if you do.
Okay. And then the intent is that we'll just read through these right now and to put them on the radar and to make the public aware, and then come back at a later date to approve them, right? Closer to the...
Yes. When is the statutory requirement for the warrant articles to be approved?
Well, they have to be approved by February 9th. So that would be, February 9th, that's when the budget committee needs to hold a public hearing. So the budget committee needs to see them before February 9th. But like everything else, the last day for collective bargaining agreements is February 9th. And that's usually at a budget committee public hearing. So I don't have the budget committee schedule up here, but we want to give them to the budget committee whenever the last date they have to meet to look at these warrant articles and give them a couple of whacks at them. So
we have a meeting. Thank you, Matt. So we have a meeting on next Tuesday the 19th, and then again on February 1st. So I think we're on track for one of those.
Yeah, correct.
Good. So Matt, I'm going to go ahead and just let you read through the warrant articles.
Sure. The first one is just a placeholder for election of officials when those come to bear through the filing period. The second one is a warrant article that we have every single year. Shall the Merrimack School Board be authorized to accept on behalf of the district without further action by the voters gifts, legacies, and devices of personal or real property which may become available to the district during the fiscal year. It's a majority vote. The board votes on this article. The budget committee does not, because there is no money associated with it. It's just so the district can accept gifts of real property such as land. Years ago, we accepted a donation of 13 acres down the hill from the high school and the superintendent's office that goes almost into Buckley's and adjacent to the fire station. That was known as the Ronka property, WRONKA. And we also received a donation from the town of Merrimack of an acre of land right near adjacent to the parking lot of the high school and one of the fields. So If we didn't have this article, the board couldn't accept that and would have to go to or hold a special meeting in order to accept that. And going through the whole deliberative session, the vote, everything like that. So this just kind of streamlines the whole process. Number three, we're in negotiations with the Merrimack Educational Support Staff Association currently, and that's a placeholder warrant article for any warrant article that may or may not come forward from negotiations between the Merrimack School Board and the Merrimack Educational Support Staff Association. Number four, that's a majority vote only. That would have to approved by the school board and the budget committee because there would be funding associated with that. Article 4 is a placeholder. This is in case Article 3 fails. It authorizes the school board to call a special meeting at its option to address the cost items in the collective bargaining agreement. So if it does fail, you can call a special meeting without going to Superior Court to get approval for that. If not, you would have to go to Superior Court. Superior Court normally only allows special meetings in the case of emergencies, which in this case, a failed support staff agreement or a failed agreement of any kind like that as such would not really be deemed a necessary an emergency. So it's kind of necessary to have this, and we've had this every single year since they passed that law that created the option for this maybe 2 decades ago. Article 5 is something we had talked about before. It was in the superintendent's budget message to raise and appropriate the sum of $450,000 for the purpose of purchasing computers for the district to support the educational goals of providing a device to each student. As I said, that was mentioned in the superintendent's budget message. The sum of $450,000 was mentioned there. I kept the wording on these articles really light, so it's very clear. If anyone wants any, if these do go forward, if anybody wants any further elaboration on the subject matter of this, please let me know, and I'd be glad to put that in there. But for the purposes of our discussions this evening, I figured I'd just kind of keep things nice and streamlined. So this would be by a majority vote only. I don't think I have that in there, but I need to put that in there. And it has to be voted on by the school board and by the budget committee because it does contain funding. The next one is something we had talked about at a school board meeting just recently. And then we talked about it back in 2018 as far as putting unit ventilators in some of the areas throughout the building. This one is in response to a particular issue at Merrimack High School, realizing CO2 levels are higher in certain rooms. There's 11 rooms in the high school that we're looking at. We have that proposal from Honeywell. So it reads, shall the district raise and appropriate the sum of $400,000 for the purpose of improving classroom ventilation through the purchase and installation of unit ventilators and associated controls from the Merrimack High School. What I mean by associated controls is all these unit ventilators have to be tied into our main building management system. They're just not individually controlled by the classroom teacher. They're controlled by the computer that controls everything, all our HVAC systems, all our pumps, all our fans, all our heating equipment, everything like that. It's all tied into the Honeywell EBI system. This is majority vote required. I'll add that in there. And because it's a money warrant article, school board needs to vote on it and the budget committee has to vote on it. And then I think it says on your copy, I fixed it on mine, Article 9, but I have Article 7 is a placeholder just for the operating budget. And that has to be voted on by the school board and by the budget committee also. So that's kind of a brief warrant that we have. Like I said, we have one for the support staff association contract, if we come to agreement on that, the placeholder, the warrant article for the one-to-one computers for the students, and an article to improve ventilation, which is pointed out in a report done 2018 and a discussion we had recently with Honeywell, with Jim Lucy and senior mechanical engineer Bob Marcotte. So basically, that's it as far as the warrant goes for your review and perusal. Thank you.
On board, any questions or comments? Lori and then Andy.
So Matt, with the CARE Act money, if we were to receive more money from that CARE Act for COVID, would that go towards some of that 450,000 for computers?
Well, if we're talking about the latest round of funding, which may be, because Congress just passed, I don't know how much New Hampshire is getting, but they're getting quite a bit.
Quite a bit.
I don't know the exact amount that Merrimack would get, but we could get enough for computers, which would be an appropriate expense, and for the ventilation also. Wow. So there's the potential that both of them might be covered by the additional CARES Act funding that will be coming to us. Maybe I could put something in, like when we do other warrant articles, and to accept gifts, grants, or state funding to offset any portion of this warrant article. I could plop that in both of those articles too. Yes, that's correct.
And then Andy.
So first, I have comments on both of the warrant articles that you put in there. But the first question is to piggyback off of what Lori just talked about around this. So would the wording of the warrant article be that if we received grants that we would not take the money from taxation? I mean, to me, I want to make sure the whole thing about warrant articles is once you do a warrant article, you have to take through taxation the money to fulfill the warrant article if the voters approve it. If you do the wording that says that we will take grants if available, and anything that the grants don't cover we'll take from taxation, that's different. And the risk that we run is if the voters turn this down, then what we do, it's like the no means no kind of thing. Do we have the ability to buy computers with the CARES money if we put it in a warrant article and if it gets turned down? You see what I mean? I'm almost tempted to not put this in here and plan on using what we can to fulfill as much as we can, simply to avoid the potential conflict that could occur.
Before you comment, Matt, if I could just say one other thing. I just want the board also to remember that in mid-November, we were made aware of $750,000 that became available to us. I don't know how long it was available, but we heard about it for the first time in mid-November. And we were told it not only had to be expended, but anything expended need to be received and installed by December 30th. So I just want to be sure that people understand that. Let's just say we get clarity about that funding. I have no idea what stipulations will be put on it. So if the stipulation is, you get this money, but it has to be, the installation has to be done by April 1st, or, whatever, then that's another thing to consider, because we found ourselves in that position in the fall. And as you know, that money was spent to support the purchase of, many things, but one of them was, cameras that we have been and will continue to talk about. So anyway, I just wanted to remind people that there could be a stipulation that we don't know anything about yet that will then potentially impact our ability to use the money the way we would like to. That's all.
Yeah, that's a very good point. You need to know the stipulations around the funding source, what the timeline is, and we had 6 weeks turnaround to actually apply. We applied previous expenditures towards the $750,000 that we got that we had to be spent by December 30th. And we took CARES money that we had already spent, and we're going to apply that to the 750 because that had a expiration date of September 30, 2021. So you're never quite sure what's going on until you receive the check and then see what the stipulations are. What's the hook? And I think the hook on the 750 was you almost had an impossible task given the Christmas holidays and whatnot. You know, we came through, but now the DOE is asking for any money that wasn't spent to go back to the Department of Ed and go into their general fund. So it almost kind of makes you think twice on what's the real intent here. When you're looking at these warrant articles, if the warrant articles were to fail, then of course you couldn't, no means no, so you can't do it because basically people are saying you can't buy unit ventilators and you can't buy computers. So they fail, period. Even if you tie them into a funding source, you know, it's better off to say, you know, and to apply for and received any gifts and grants to offset said appropriation, and not say that it's going to be totally tied to the money that is supposedly, well, it should come from the state through the federal government.
So, and Cinda, just to close my thought on this, and then I'll let others.
Okay, so
is that
you'll finish, and then Shannon after you.
Yeah. So, to having been around the block a few times on this budget stuff, I know that if we plan too tightly for this, something's going to bite us. And my desire is almost to leave this off as a warrant article because we've got to close it within a month or so, right? We've got about a month maybe to decide, but make it the sort of school board working directive that when any funds come in during the next 6 months, that we work with administration to make sure that we direct them towards technology, at least a portion of them, to address this. I mean, I know it'd be great to do one-to-one, and maybe we as a board could decide to add some money to the operating budget to do that. I just hate hanging this one out as a warrant article, given the complexities of budgets and of fund grants and things like that. So that's just my thoughts.
Shannon?
Thank you. I have a couple of thoughts around this. I am inclined to support the article, and I'll explain my reasoning. First, I think that it went back to an earlier comment made about the short runway for CARES Act funding fulfillment. And the one thing that also went along with that is a supply and demand issue, a crash in the inventory and logistics to be able to get the technology to buy, deploy, and meet the deadline of December 31st. Just getting the right equipment was, I would call like a death match. Honestly, it was, the market was brutal and the battle was fierce. And I'm sure, and I know that just even from my role, but I remember hearing that at prior board meetings that, it was a true victory to find the technology. And so by limiting how we get the technology to grants to offset the costs, I do have the concern that we will have money when the stuff isn't available and no money when the stuff is. So those are my concerns with that. The other thing, and I think as a board, we've seen this over the years, is until things are dire, we have many families that won't ask for help. And so, that one-to-one kind of takes care of things. It takes care of a couple of things, and things, and I'm going to get into the layers of that too, so I might be a little long-winded and I apologize. The first is having the assurance that every child has a device. And has not been assured. I'm even today, like knowing what we've been dealing with, I think we've been still deploying devices readily. So I will keep that in mind based on what we were hearing at our table. Second is that we take great pride in having a very lean IT department. And, we talk about this every budget cycle. When we do add a person, it still gets them barely above water because of how lean they have been historically in this district. We have tasked them with a lot more technology to manage But when we also have the environment in which each student has their own platform for device, having them be the tech support for each and every platform that families may have that may not be standard to what we have been deploying, does create an inequity, because if students cannot get their personal devices working up to snuff, and we are also stretched thin on devices we can provide, we're putting ourselves in a very difficult situation. So I look at what we can do to make sure that we have educational equity. If we can't support the personally owned devices to the level we can support district owned devices. So those are the things I think about. So those are my thoughts initially on that. So I would like to see this article for all the reasons, um, you know, that I mentioned. And also when it comes to CARES funding, I think there are a lot of areas of the district where CARES funding could be applied that may not be devices, but still would be those infrastructure improvements that would help us with some of our long-term strategy that we've talked, both Nancy has talked about and Tom Tussaud has talked about in different areas of our operation. So I don't worry. I don't worry about a need for projects. They're boundless. I've noticed over the years because we've taken such good care of aged infrastructure. Well, certain things it's not going to sustain anymore. So those are just my thoughts on it. And so I hope for consideration for this article.
Matt and then Andy.
Yeah, thank you. Um, huh. I went back to 2003, 2004, and I knew we used language similar to what I'm going to, propose to add to this for the middle school. You remember when we built the middle school, we also got kindergarten aid for that project because we were building rooms to replace other rooms, and then when we allowed the total grade realignment from K through 4, from K through 5 to K through 4, and staggered everybody up. And one of the lines in there that says, and furthermore, to authorize the school board to apply for, obtain, and accept federal, state, or other aid, if any, which may be available for said project. So as far from a sales standpoint, if you wanted to keep these warrant articles as warrant articles, I would probably plop that information in both of those warrant articles, giving the implication that if state aid is available, that we will use said state aid for such projects. That's just a thought. Okay, I'm done.
Andy?
So I'm going to be blunt, and we're talking only about the technology one because I have another thought on the ventilation. If we believe as a board that these one-to-ones are as important as they appear to be, put it in the operating budget, because then it frees us up with the ability to either use the CARES money to offset those costs through financial accounting to return money to the taxpayers if we get it back, or to use it for other purposes. But if it is truly as important as people believe it is, then put it in the operating budget.
Can I comment on that? I'm sorry. I'll wait my turn.
I had my hand up first.
All right.
Yes,
Matt, and then you, Mark.
You put it in the operating budget. Now your operating budget is $370,000 higher than the default budget. We all know what's going to happen there. It's going to fail.
I don't want to play the default games. We haven't started it. I mean, we're making a budget for what we believe it takes to run the district. Okay. And we've just had a discussion about equipment that is critical to the execution of what it is we're trying to do. If we're going to play games with the default budget that we tend to every year, then let's find things that we believe would make it there. I guess maybe as I'm getting older, I'm getting tired of this default budget thing that we deal with. But if we need some of the budget, we put it there.
So before, just real quick, I just want maybe you to think about what you just said. So just the playing games part, can you just define that a little bit more? I mean, Andy, because I think that kind of sets the wrong stage for the public.
Sorry, I said the wrong thing, and I'll apologize to the board for this. Every year we go through the creation of a budget, and we try to make sure that the proposed budget is less than the default, and try to make sure that what we think we need to spend will have enough money for everything that we need to do. And I understand the logic behind that. But if we as a board believe that we need something in the budget, then we add it into the budget, and then if we want to make it less than the default, then we take something else out that's not as important. I mean, we've just now begun discussing this, and I've heard an argument from some board members that this is important. So I can't risk it going into a warrant article, regardless of the wording you put around it. And maybe we address something else in a warrant article instead that isn't as critical to the education of our students as this. So I apologize if I said that wrong.
And, thank you for clarifying that. And I actually agree with you on some of those points, because I think there is a risk when no means no, to limit ourselves if we put it on a warrant article, and then we can't even, if we were to get some government money, not be able to use it for that. I think is a pretty big risk. But Marco, I know you've been waiting to talk, so go ahead.
Thank you. So I guess I too want to be, blunt. I'm not, we were not playing to any particular goal of default over, above, no matter what anybody says, we weren't. What we were doing is trying to develop a budget that provided for what our district needs in order to be successful in the next fiscal year. That was it. And we also asked our team to develop a budget that was really based this year on needs to get to that end rather than wants. Needs rather than wants. Because this is a year that has seen a crisis affect a lot of people's financial lives. And contrary to what some might think, we really do think about that. And so this year, we heard the board say that, there were some goals, and those goals were outlined in, our budget message, and you heard each of the departments talk about it, technology, safety, maintenance, curriculum, / personnel. And that doesn't mean we asked for personnel. It means we considered those things. And so we looked carefully at that, and then we applied the need one. So we have not had one-to-one up to this point, and Board Member Barnes makes an excellent point. When COVID hit, it exposed a lot of vulnerabilities. One of them being the food insecurity that many people in our town have, and another one being the lack of access to technology. So we really did work very hard and continue to work hard to provide people with both food and with technology. But I'm also persuaded by something that I've heard people in this community talk about for a long time, which is to sometimes let the community weigh in on decisions that affect itself. And so I think that we came to the conclusion that this is a situation where we certainly can have a successful school year next year without one-to-one, which is why we didn't suggest putting it in the budget. But we also know where the future is headed, and we feel like we want to do a good job letting the community know that their vote to support one-to-one would be in the best interest of their community and their children. I think there's a time, and we concluded, and the board may well conclude otherwise, and we'll support that, but administration's job is to present a budget, and that's what we did. And we did it bearing in mind the idea that there are times, and we thought this might be one of those times, where we present a challenge to the community and let the community weigh in. We will be successful next year, even if we don't have one-to-one devices. So that's all but yet, I don't mean to imply that isn't where the future is going. So sooner or later, that's where we need to be. But I think the community, our opinion is let the community, weigh in via warrant. That's a good use of it, we thought. Anyway, that's the thinking expanded.
Any other comments or questions? Lori?
So I totally agree that the future is moving to one-to-one. And I also agree that I think, warrant articles are for the community to weigh in. And I think that it is the future, but if it isn't next year, we would still be okay. And so I'm supporting that we, keep the warrant article. I like, Matt had some wording that I think is very good wording, and it protects us and it helps, to let the community have a voice in this matter. And the rollout of one-to-one, there's a lot of work to be done. So I know that we're going to have some committees together to put this all together. But I'm excited about one-to-one, but I do think we should have the community vote on it.
Cinda, you talking? You're on mute.
Yeah, this part always feels a little awkward every year because it's kind of like what comes first, the chicken or the egg, as we kind of go through the warrant articles, because obviously where we decide to put things in the warrant articles impacts the budget that we're about to discuss as well. I would say, from my own personal opinion, I know I've heard what you've all said, is that I'd prefer to see that one-to-one in our operating budget, regardless of the fact that it may put us over default. And if it comes down from default, then we have that risk for sure. But I feel strongly more than ever is a time that we need one-to-one devices. I feel like it's the right thing to do. COVID is still here. There's a lot of uncertainty about when vaccinations will be out for the general public. And I feel that kids will need to rely on having this device now more than ever. And so I feel it's important that it's in the operating budget. I mean, even if we have to pull something out or cut something to put in a warrant article that isn't as important or as necessary, I'd like to see it part of the operating budget. And then at that point, if we were to receive any federal funds, then we could just allocate those towards those devices. But those are my thoughts. But I think we can kind of move into the next section where we're going to walk through and have our working session where we can kind of resolve really where we want some of these items to lie. That sounds good. Okay. So we will go into moving on from the warrant articles. We'll move into item number 6, which is the work session for discussion of the proposed 2021-2022 budget. So this is the time every year that after we've listened to all of the budget hearings that we've been listening to over our last few school board meetings, this is the opportunity for the school board, for those of you watching at home or that may not be familiar with the process, to be able to make some suggestions, potential changes to the operating budget. The process is such that once we go through this and once we go through and confirm our warrant articles, there's a process where we'll then go to the budget committee for further review and potential suggestions for changes. So having said that, what I would like to do is just open it up to the board members on anything that you've heard so far through the discussions or any questions that you have from administration to be able to begin our work session. Lori?
So when you look at the operating budget, I think that the thing that we all know, it really comes down to personnel. And so my question would be to the superintendent. So we had the 504 coordinator that was grant funded, and now we're asking for it was partial grant funded, partially in the budget. I would support this, but I would hope that maybe we could develop a new job description to include things like, it's a guidance position, extended learning opportunities, internships, work skills. Some of those things could be to expand that person's job description to be, to lead our school in the 21st century, and some of the things that would give students other pathways for learning.
So, Lori, did you want me to comment on that, or just take that as feedback, or how?
Yeah, that's it. You can. That would be my 2 cents.
Yeah. So I appreciate that. I think, so I have a couple of thoughts on that. The things that you mentioned that would be potentially added are very important. Whether or not at the moment the best place for that would be to be added to the responsibilities of the 504 coordinator, or parsed out among other staff, in a different way, I think is to be determined. What I could tell you right now, having in the role of assistant superintendent, working with that person for years, in fact, bringing that person with some creative funding, working with the youth council, I know it pretty well. And now John works with that individual. The numbers of 504 cases at the high school have increased exponentially over the last several years. And so I just want to caution that person is completely occupied with 504, and that becomes as much as it is a moral imperative to make sure that students are served in the right way. If you take that out, we cannot set ourselves up for Office of Civil Rights complaints, because we're not meeting requirements for 504, which is part of the reason that we've continued to advocate for this role. So I think what I'd say to you tonight is, without giving that a lot of thought at the moment, I completely agree with the general recommendation to have those functions be carried out better than they are, or in some cases to begin. I'm not prepared to say tonight that it would be that role that would get it, without doing a real deep dive into what's possible. Because at the moment, I would tell you, I'm not sure that there's a whole lot more on that person's plate at the moment. But that's my initial impression, just having worked with her for a number of years and knowing the scope that's increased. So I take it as a challenge, and I'm sure that we will be able to work through it. If your question has to do with that, that's the one thing where I just say I need a little more time.
Anyone else? Andy.
So when we went through the budget reviews, one of the things that I noted was the expenditures around the Brentwood building, and that the actual expenditure that we saw for the fiscal year 1920 was $7,800 spent on utilities to keep Brentwood alive, versus the budget amount, which was $23K. So one of the proposals I want to make, both in terms of a budget accuracy as well as to indicate clearly the true cost to keep Brentwood going before we make the decision to tear it down, is I'd like to propose that across the 4 utility lines, which is water, sewer, LP gas, electrical, and oil, that, and I'll leave that up to the discretion of administration how to do this, but we cut the $23,000 overall estimate in half to $11,500. Is that right? No. Yeah, $11,500, which gives them about $3,000 to $4,000 of headroom should utility costs go up. But I think it's a more accurate estimation of what the actual budget costs are.
Is that a motion, Andy? Because I'll second it if it is.
Yes. Yeah.
Any other discussion on that? Any thoughts from administration?
No.
Okay, we will go ahead and move that to a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. The motion carries 5-0-0. Okay. Any, Andy?
This is more of a question, and frankly, we talked about this briefly last summer. If you look at last year's operating budget, we had an operating budget of $80,111,503 as the operating budget that was voted on. But then there were 4 warrant articles which were voted on and approved by the voters during the election, which was for, if I remember correctly, it was the gym floor, the windows, the site study at the high school complex, as well as moving money into the capital reserve fund for emergencies. Those 4 warrant articles the voters approved came up to $602,500 approximately, of which I'm not sure the status of where those all have gone. So one of the questions I have for administration is, could you let us know as a board, the dispensation of the money from those 4 warrant articles and which were used and which are going to be returned to the taxpayers and at what point that'll occur?
I can do that now.
Yeah, I didn't do it.
I can do it right now.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I figured it'd be pretty easy for you to do. That's why I said
I'm looking at last year's warrant. First one was 150,000 going into capital reserve. That's done.
Right.
Okay. The next one is 265 window replacement. That's not done because of the timing of, the actual vote. We didn't have time to bid that out, so that's going to go back to the taxpayers when we set the tax rate and we know what our fund balance is from 2021. So that'll go back for the fall billing.
So like a little less than a year from now. So the money you returned, you talked about last year, and now this would be for the following year.
Following year. It's tough when you, okay.
Yep.
So
that's before you continue, I just wanted, because these are really important details, so I want people to understand. When you say didn't get to bid, remember that because of COVID, the vote was delayed from April to late June. And that was far too late for any opportunity to bid, much less, get the work to be in place. So to be done for the summer. So when we had town meeting last March, we were just about 2 weeks away from, whatever then happened. So it had COVID not happened, you would have done what you do every year, which is, have that happen, then go to the meeting in April and have that happen. I mean, the vote in April, have that happen. And then had it been successful, you would have been able to accomplish it. So I just want people to understand that was not for, a delay in seeking aid or seeking bids or anything. It was literally the impact of COVID on the vote, which then put everything out. So I'm sure people get that, but a lot of times things are lost in translation. So I just want to be really clear that that's understood.
Yeah. So the 265, because of the timing of the vote, didn't allow us to go out and get any bids because everybody's busy. Something like that, a project like that, you want to bid that out right at April after the vote or even before the vote, contingent upon the vote passing. The 82,500, that's the master plan. We're going to be using that money. And then the other one was the $105,000 for the replacement of the gym, Smith Gym bleachers. And that has not been used because that's a long lead item also. So then we have, 125,000 for Brentwood. That failed anyway.
It failed, right. So what you're saying is that the 265 and the 105, which is 370,000, will be returned to the taxpayers because the voting came too late to bid them out properly and be able to do them in this year.
Absolutely.
And the 150 got added to the capital reserve. Can you share really briefly how that 82,500 is going to be used for the site plan during this fiscal year? I hate to put you on the spot, and if you're not ready, we could do this in the next meeting. But I guess
no. I've already had conversations with Steve Keach about doing some preliminary design work. I'm not sure if we're going to use the whole 82,500 because that included, community forums. It included meetings,
right.
One-on-one discussions, everything like that. We wanted to get everybody involved, but when COVID hit, the party ended. So a lot of it is just boilerplate, drawing plans, coming up with IDs, documenting what's there. I'm not sure if we're going to spend the whole 82.5. We'll probably spend half of it.
Okay, it'd be good for us to have a better understanding how that's going to be used, because I know we've been busy with other things, but I think that since we're talking about budget stuff, it would be understand what it is you're going to use with that and what future school boards may need to continue to address when this comes back up to the surface again. So.
But then what we'll probably do is during the summer, whatever is left of that $82,500, we'll encumber those funds and we'll drag those monies over into 21-22. So you're not going to have to raise an extra $40,000. It'll already be there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So consider that gone for all intents and purposes.
Okay. You'll have to explain how we're.
Even if the project drags out into the summer of 2021, you encumber the funds at the end of the year by via of having an agreement with, let's say, Keach Nordstrom, whoever, to complete the project, and you define the scope, everything like that, and those monies will be carried over.
So, devil's advocate, since you're doing that, that can't be true for the other capital projects, the windows and the floor?
I wouldn't even have a contract.
Okay.
Yeah, because I have to bid the things out. I wouldn't even have a contract.
Okay.
We're best letting those go back.
Okay. I think I understand what you're saying, but it's good to explain so that people listening understand the difference between it, because essentially what we're doing is, at the end of the day, when you look at an operating budget, the operating budget includes the operating budget in the warrant plus whatever is approved by the voters in terms of warrant articles, right? So I think that as far as the clarity of the picture is concerned, we got to make sure we're real crisp on how this accounting's done.
Yeah, and even with the late vote, I believe it was the tone and tenor of the board at that time to let these go and return the money to reduce the taxes. At least that's my recollection of things. As far as the window replacement and the bleachers. I don't know if you took a vote on it, but you sure did discuss it.
It was more of a position of the board than a vote. I can't remember exactly, but
we didn't take a vote on it. That I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
But it was a position of the board.
Okay.
Lori, I saw your hand up, or are you?
Yeah, no, I have a question. I have a question for Matt, because I was in the the planning and building committees when we discussed those bleachers in Smith Gym, and there were some concerns. So, is there any way that another warrant article could go back to say, because of COVID, this was something that was approved, but we could not get the contractors in, so the money could come, stay? I mean, I don't know. That's what I'm asking.
You could put it up as a warrant article now. You wouldn't even have to mention. Well, you could if you wanted to, or we could look at another funding source, which we could look at another funding source for those projects. I'm not saying any more because I'm, trying to be cautious with what I say.
I think what Matt is alluding to is that perhaps we are.
Huh?
I think you're alluding to the fact that we are trying to do that very thing.
Yes. We are working on a plan to get that paid for without raising taxpayers' money right now.
Okay.
No CARES money. No CARES money, nothing like that. So don't worry.
More to come, it sounds like.
Yeah, I was going to say that sounds entertaining, but.
Oh, no. I don't mean to be mysterious, but, I mean, there are available funding sources through, areas that are controlled, trusts and so on. And we have close partnership with those folks, but out of respect to them and their work, we're not, thinking that it's appropriate to say a lot right now, but I wouldn't want the board or the community to think that we haven't that we're not aware or have been made aware by some of those partners and aren't working with them. It's just not appropriate at the moment to say a lot more about that.
Understood.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark.
Yep.
Okay. Andy.
Whoops, sorry. The other thing I wanted to talk about is sort of to go back a little bit to the Warrant article about the ventilation thing. So during our last meeting, or 2 meetings ago, when you had the folks from Honeywell and you did the presentation, you talked about sort of the rollout and the cost and we talked about a lot of what-if scenarios. And at the meeting after that, you put together here's what the cost would be if we did $450,000 every year over a 10-year period versus if we did some sort of a bond or something in the beginning and did as much as we could up front so we could take advantage of the benefits of the improvements on the ventilation. And while the money's cheap, be able to spread that over a period of time. And you ran the analysis and we found that it would be cheaper by, I can't remember the exact amount, it would be cheaper by a certain amount to do a bond and do everything together versus doing it piecemeal over a 10-year period. I also remember during the discussion, I asked if there was any opportunity to do something that was similar to what we did with the gas pipeline, where it was like a lease to own sort of a thing or whatever. So I guess the question is, we sort of skipped over the Warrant article on the ventilation thing, but I think it's important for us as a board to talk about how we want to address ventilation holistically. I mean, you've positioned the first 11 rooms or whatever it was in the Merrimack High School as the first year. I know that it gets less critical the further you go down the list, so that by the time you get to the very end to do the fresh air mixing, it's not as critical as it is to the early ones. But I also know that we as a district, as we move forward in time and want to make sure that we can safely get kids back without hybrid model, fully get as many as we can, not only through COVID but in the future in terms of quality should other things occur. That the CDC has certainly recommended that the inclusion or the introduction of fresh air into places where a lot of people are is really critical to making that happen. And these ventilation projects as a whole address bringing fresh air into the classrooms properly as part of the heating and ventilation thing. So I before we go out on a limb with a Warrant article picking 1 year, I'd like us as a board to decide whether there are options for us to do more with a more elongated plan and sort of weigh the risks of a bond versus other options, and how we as a board want to addressing the ventilation issues that the district has to given everything going on. So I wanted to have this conversation, and whether it's part of budget or Warrant article, I don't care how we do this, but I don't know, Cinda, I know that you had indicated that you were having similar questions about this.
Yeah, I mean, I'll put my thoughts in there, and my inclination is, with this is, there may be that opportunity. I know when we talked about it before, a few weeks back, I was very interested in the concept of potentially, going out for bond and getting it all done. Because I look at it a little differently. I mean, I think the idea of trying to spread out, year over year. And then I asked really that cost benefit, knowing that, the bond rate is lower right now. And the idea makes me happy to be able to bring all of this to the kids now, even if some, those rooms are, the air quality is still safe, if it's in any way hindering their learning, as well as you throw in the COVID situation, if there's any way that we get some benefit with being able to get that air in now, makes me really want to consider a bond to be able to do the project. I also question, just like so many other things, you get some economies of scale with a company when you're doing a bigger project versus kind of paring it down little by little. So, I mean, I'm kind of struggling with that cost benefit. On one hand, I don't like the idea of bonds. I'm pretty excited that we're coming very close to the end of it. Actually, any of our bonds, which I think is almost unheard of in a school district, to be this close to debt free. But on the other hand, I really like the idea of getting all of our rooms up to where they could be and should be, for learning and for optimal learning, as well as safety given the COVID environment. So those are my thoughts. I'm not 100% sold on that idea. I will tell you that. I know we're getting down to the wire, but I'm definitely leaning in that direction. Shannon.
The only other thing I'm going back to an earlier conversation. It was about the one-to-one devices, and that is about CARES Act funding. And where I said that there are infrastructure areas, I was actually thinking about ventilation, where infrastructure areas that CARES Act funding can be applied, but can only be applied if it's not pre-existing projects. So would it be something that we would now preclude ourselves from getting funding for, say, ventilation improvements because we already have a bond in place to make those improvements? So it's one of those things. I feel like I'm playing chicken with government money, that we're going to have to pay for something that we could have gotten at no cost to the taxpayers through government money. So that's my only apprehension with the bond, honestly. I did love the math that they came back with, that we would actually, when you consider, the one thing I really looked at was the cost of per unit increase year over year, which is normal cost of the increase of goods. And I have to say, something we didn't talk about, it's very speculative, but the cost of building materials has been very unstable since COVID hit. And even the supply and demand of such materials has been difficult. And anything that would be coming out of, say, an Eastern country, the logistics of getting materials is also something that could present challenges. So, if we have assurances with a bond that we're going to get the equipment and be able to install it, that also gives me some, there's just so much going on with the idea of the bond and the idea of not bonding, that I usually have I usually have a solid feeling about which way to go. And because of all the unknowns that are presented with such an, unknown, funding mechanism being these CARES Act funds, round two, I don't have, I would love to hear administration's thoughts on that.
Well, real quick, before I turn it over to Mark and Matt, the other concept would be, what if we didn't fund the entire amount? What if we left the least critical, the 25%, let's say, least critical parts of the project that could be addressed, perhaps down the road, to give us some flexibility? Just food for thought. But Mark, I saw your hand up.
Right. And just to close, a bond would need a 2/3 vote.
Mm-hmm.
So versus a simple majority like everything else. Okay.
So I want to just build on Shannon. I think what you raise, it's impossible right now to know what the future is going to be, but it is important to just linger on what you said. I'm not saying what I'm about to say because I'm cynical. I don't think it's because of what I've experienced, what we have experienced, and that is that on the one hand, we have been allowed to be in receipt of substantial sums of money. That is a true fact. But on the other hand, there have been, just one example I described recently, but not the only example, there have been, sometimes massive and sometimes, less massive stipulations that you don't have a lot of time to prepare for. And so, the cynical part would say that, it looks good to offer the money, but then really maybe we want the money back. And so we'll try to create structures whereby it's going to be almost impossible for you to spend it, but we can say we gave it to you. And so I don't know if that's part of, and it's not my business to speculate as to whether that's part of the master plan. I'm only telling you what our reality has been. And so to the point that Shannon raises about, whether or not there'd be a stipulation that says a pre-existing project, funds cannot be applied to. I don't know, but it wouldn't surprise me if that were a stipulation. And so I just think that we should linger on that thought for just a little bit, because there has been no evidence to support that there's a predictable way that we know when money's going to be available, or a predictable way to know what the stipulations attached to it are. And if there were, then we could provide the board with better guidance. But since there isn't, and there's been not a history of that, it's hard for us to guide you, and it's hard for you to make a decision. We recognize that. I just want to linger on that idea. So I'm glad that Shannon brought it up. Sorry, Matt, you have more.
Matt, go ahead.
I'm just keeping my hand in the air. I'm not interrupting you by being rude.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
But I can bring you back to a little bit of history not too long ago when we got the ARRA monies. I remember sitting with David St. Jean in my office going through that grant and talking to, my gosh, I forget who they were. But anyway, two really high-ranking educated officials up there. And the main thing, you can supplement your budget with the ARRA funds. You can't supplant. So anything that was currently in your budget, like the cost of teachers, like the cost of paras, like the cost of certified occupational therapists, you can get additional, but you can't take your current crew and fund them with this government federal money. So I kind of err on the side of something that's budgeted and then getting federal money, and perhaps having that same rule apply. You can supplement your budget, but you can't supplant your budget. You can't offset your tax rate for something you already have budgeted for with federal funds. And that's been the rule through IDEA. That's been the rule through everything. John can talk about that. And so from a historical standpoint, that's the reference point that I have. And that was around $1 million. And we bought a lot of equipment, a lot of stuff for special ed, tons of stuff for special ed. And we avoided the cliff effect because we didn't hire people. And then once their positions were done through the ARRA funds, get rid of them. Because that was another bozo no-no that you couldn't do from the state. So you couldn't supplant, and you have to avoid the cliff effect from personnel. So this, as Mark said, there's some unknown unknowns here with that money. Number one, when's the check coming? I haven't seen it yet, but supposedly it's been dispersed. Maybe it has. But, and then what are the guiding rules by it? I've looked at a big FAQ thing from Caitlin up at the state, and I'm trying to walk my way through that to see if there's anything specific. But right now, I can't give you anything specific. But there's a lot of uncertainty. That's all I want to say. And I don't like uncertainty when it comes to your money. So.
Andy.
So, Matt and Shannon, I think, can you remind the board how we did the Honeywell retrofit way back when we did a multi-year agreement with Honeywell to retrofit the systems around lighting and ventilation and things like that, and how that went down?
Yeah, it was a 12-year. I'm sorry, Shannon. Do you want to
go ahead? It was 12-year bond.
It was a 12-year lease purchase.
Yeah, so that's the subtle difference that I wanted to get out. A bond requires, I think it's 3/5 vote. I'm not sure it's 2/3. I think it's 60%. But a lease purchase doesn't, right? A lease purchase is 50%. And the question I have is, have we investigated a lease purchase idea to address the ventilation with Honeywell so that we can do this over multi-year and not treat it as a bond, but treat it as sort of an ongoing improvement to the buildings?
To do all, in talking with Jim Lucy, to do all of the ventilation and just not the critical ones, you're looking at probably, this is rough numbers from Jim, probably like an $8 million project to do everything. So you'd have to do a lease purchase agreement for $8 million. So let's say you want to do just the critical one. So it's $4 million. Talk about that. Mm-hmm. And so, but it has to have a non-appropriation clause in it, Meaning every single year, the board could decide not to pay the lease, and then the Honeywell comes in, takes all their gear away, and leaves you with holes in the classrooms, everything like that. You know that's going to happen, but that's the reason why it gives you the option of having a majority-only vote, because it has that non-appropriation clause in it in your contract with the vendor. And
So how did that compare to the 4-year lease we did for putting the gas pipeline in several years back?
the bond rates are always a little bit lower than the lease rate, but not by much, not at this point in time.
But no, my point was we chose to do a lease purchase
Yeah.
agreement for the gas line.
So you wouldn't have to get the 60%.
Right, but did we I don't remember as a board we have to reapprove it every year versus ripping the gas lines out. I'm trying to figure out what the difference is.
It was in the operating budget, but you had the board had the option. We put it in the operating budget as an obligation because we signed a contract. But if any time the board could have said, we're not paying this lease, and then the company has the right to repossess all the equipment. So it's kind of a lease purchase versus a bond. A bond is, you're paying the bond come hell or high water, but the lease, you can always back out of it from year to year. But the consequences of doing such is just devastating. So you would never do it. But it's just a wrinkle in the law that allows you to not go the supermajority route and just do the simple majority route because of this clause in the contract with a lease purchase versus a bond. And the rates for a lease purchase are usually just a tad higher, but money's so cheap now, I think it's almost the same thing. If that's confusing, I'm sorry, but that's the easiest way I can explain it.
No, I think it makes sense.
Yeah.
Andy, what are your thoughts?
I'm gonna call you a fibber, Mr. Matt, because the natural gas lease was a warrant article.
Yeah, well, so they have to be a warrant article to start.
But you said it was in an operating budget.
Subsequent.
I'm confused. No, we did. So we did
years. It's the payment for the lease, just like the bond payment is in the operating budget. The initial start of the lease is a warrant article that can get a simple majority. As such, with the gas.
So what you're saying is a lease requires us to commit for multi-years, but the difference is the board has the option each year, as opposed to a bond that you've really committed to. This is like
it's with the bank.
It's like the who's more committed during breakfast, the chicken or the pig kind of thing, right? So in other words, if we did a 10-year lease, for example, to do the improvements and voted with a simple majority, future boards could choose to not fund that, whatever that amount is, that 400,000.
You would never do that though, because like I said, the results would be devastating.
No, I know.
In order to start the lease, you have to have a warrant article.
Right. No.
And then in subsequent budgets, you put it in your operating budget, just like
just like a bond. Right. No. No. You made it sound as though it wasn't a warrant article at the beginning, right? So maybe I misunderstood what you said.
For that I apologize.
Yeah, right. So the bottom line is you're right. And my whole point about this thing was, if we find a way to do either a lease purchase where we do an initial thing on a warrant article and then stretch it over 10 years, is the cost of that less than us going every year to the voters through an individual warrant article for another $450,000 to do little bits and pieces? Because as we talked about during the discussion with Honeywell, while they couldn't do everything the first year, they could do more, and we could take advantage of it. As opposed to taking 10 years to do it all, we could do it maybe in 3, for example. That kind of a thing. So that's the whole reason I wanted to do it, and find out whether lease purchase was an option for us to do this as opposed to a bond, because it requires a lesser vote level. So
lease purchase is an option. I can run you some numbers on those.
But only if, this is just me thinking, right? And so you're hearing Andy raw spitting things out. I think the board itself needs to understand what approach it wants to take. I want to hear other people chime in to see, because I don't want you to chase down something that nobody else on the board supports. So
Well, I'm happy to add, I love the idea of the lease purchase. Um, in order to get, I think when, what I don't want to do is be, I'm not saying that we are, I'm just saying, of being myopic and kind of, it's a little different to me than how we might approach our roofs. I like the idea of, it sounds like a good option to be able to, this ventilation is something that we haven't put a lot of focus on for many, many years. So I like the idea of coming up with an option that will allow us to get some improvements in this area without being myopic, kind of looking down the road, and being able to take advantage of those benefits earlier, knowing that we're going to spend that money anyways, and the cost benefit being favorable. So that's my thought. Shannon.
I just wanted to add one thing, and that is every year when we do our capital improvement plan reviews, Matt always provides us, and he actually provided us, even if whether it was a bond or that lease agreement, what the payments were in addition to those large dollar items that were being discussed in the CIP. So that's one of my favorite documents that Matt does. I tell him every year it's my favorite document because it really tells us what you would call the impact to the spike outside of traditional operations, the utilities, the staff, that what the spike and the dip impacts are of those infrastructure improvements in management. So that's something I think that it's the number is going to be light. I would say I'm using a very unscientific and unfinancially sound term based on a $4 million bond or $4 million lease agreement, as it would be. And then, I think the first year, Matt, would it have the same? The question really is, does it have the same first years like this low payment, and then subsequent years have that high, that not high number, but higher number? But the first year it would be like a small amount to get us into the agreement, and then subsequent years, because we're about to pay off another bond. So I think that as we're getting into one thing, getting out of one thing and getting into another, you're not going to see a dip or a spike in the tax rate from that one thing.
Yeah, first year's payment on a bond issue, because of when they float it, is always a half year's. Lease purchase, I think it's similar. So first year's payment is always less.
Okay. So I would be inclined to entertain that. Again, looking at and actually asking the question back to you again, that if we're asking the taxpayers to enter into an agreement for this equipment, but does that preclude us then if, say, there's federal funding through, say, a CARES Act 2, CARES Act 3 that would give us access to those projects? Would that preclude us from doing those projects if the warrant got turned down?
It may preclude you from using the funding you get from the CARES Act
to do ventilation,
to offset the cost of your lease payment.
Right. Or say the lease payment gets
turned
down. The lease payment gets turned down under that circumstance because we asked the taxpayers for this lease. And I think the number that Jim gave us at our meeting a couple of weeks ago is $4 million. So say we did a lease payment for a $4 million project and the lease gets turned down. But does that mean that we cannot no longer accept, say, federal funding to do that ventilation in our facilities with federal grants?
Well, the purpose of the warrant article would be not to provide a lease. It would be for the purpose of providing ventilation. So that's the purpose. And when no means no, it means no to the purpose, not the funding mechanism. I found out about that a long time ago when I tried to lease a fire truck, and then they changed it at deliberative session to buy a fire truck, and that got thrown out by DRA. So anyway, so the thing is, I don't know. We have to look to see what the rules of these monies are.
Well, and also, if I could just point out that, you know, I kind of feel like we might be putting a little bit too much emphasis on the federal monies. I mean, you know, that's not gonna last forever, and it you know, and I mean, it's very much related to the particular moment in time we're in, but I don't think that this is something that we, you know, can spend a lot of time anticipating we're just gonna have. It's gonna end at some point, and it might be ending, you know, sooner than we think. And like we've said, before it ends, you know, there may be stipulations, as there have been to this point, that will make their use, you know, difficult for the purposes that we're talking about here. So, you know, there's a lot of unknowns, and that, so I think we just, you know, want to bear that in mind. Bear that in mind.
And
I agree with that, because essentially we have to go about and prepare for our operations. And so, I mean, I think we need to be able to give ourselves flexibility. I think to your point, Mark, with something like this and what we've seen in the past, there's been a short window and things have to be installed and ready by that time, which is going to make using the money for something like this anyways more challenging. I mean, I have no reason to believe that we're going to get an extended period of time to use that money. They want to see fast, instant from what we've seen.
Right, and just to build on that, I'm sorry to interrupt, Cindy, but just to build on that, let's remember the purpose of the money was to help, you know, that was designated for schools, was to help schools through, you know, a crisis. So it was, you know, hey, you need, you know, PPE, here's some money, go spend it for the PPE. You know, you need computers, here's some money, go spend it for that purpose. So it's very much intended, or has so far been intended to, you know, like, here's a crisis, here's a need that comes from that crisis, here's some money to deal with it. It's not really meant to be used or considered for, you know, longer term projects or need, and we've heard this a lot, for needs that arise. You know, a lot of people are doing what we're doing. We're seeing certain things, you know, like Cindy mentioned, you know, we haven't been focused on ventilation for a while. Okay, now a pandemic hits and we start to look at ventilation. We've provided studies to our teachers and to the board that talk about, you know, ventilation doesn't seem to have a direct correlation to COVID. That was a study done in nursing homes, but the larger issue is it's better to have good ventilation than not. So this purpose of this money, though, is once you uncover that, is not to say, well, now let's help you fix problems from, you know, before. It's crisis, need, spend. And that's the intent, which is why they put firm limits on the time, a lot of stipulations. And we've sat between Matt, John, and we've sat through a lot of meetings where we hear about those stipulations. So I just think we have to really curtail what we imagined we're going to get or be able to use for purposes other than crisis, need, spend.
Yeah. And I would say, you know, just to kind of wrap up my thoughts on this, is that I like the idea of the lease purchase. I really do. I think it has a lot of value. The problem is it has a large number attached to it up front. And I think that getting the understanding of the financial benefit that we need to get this done, we're going to do it, but we found a way that's actually, because if we rolled out this project over a number of years, it would cost us more than the actual, at the time we were looking at bond, but if we're looking at equal money, lease purchase. So we're finding a way by securing the project now to secure the price of the unit, to get the units in place, and things that we're not going to be asking every year for this stuff because we're doing it now, and that means that the price isn't going to be higher than either. So that's going to be, I think it's going to be an education cycle that we would have to really embrace to make sure that we get that buy-in, because, you know, we know what we have to do. You know, like what's called the must-haves were 400,000, which is what we put in that Warrant article. But, you know, there's a second layer that's need to have, not must, but need to have. You know, sooner than later, basically, and that brought us to that 4 million. And I think that that's the difference. So the 10% most critical, and then the other 90% that are necessary, that was presented from Jim a few weeks ago. But I think, I'm supportive of it, but I think we just have to commit as a board in a very difficult time to, communicate to the masses the value of doing the project in this lease purchase method versus going with a few units here and a few units there. So I'm inclined to it. I really want to support the learning environment of our students. This will absolutely accomplish that with the quality of air. But I definitely think that we have some work that we have to commit to as a board, and support to make sure that it's understood before voting happens. And the voter's guide won't be enough.
Any other thoughts? Andy?
Just want to take a minute to offer my apologies if I'm very short tonight. I'm sort of freewheeling all of my thoughts here. So to Matt and to Mark and others, if I come across too abrupt or say things I don't mean, I'm sort of passionate about this kind of stuff. So please accept my apologies for the way I'm approaching. But I also, we've talked about ventilation for a while. Honeywell brought some of this in, improved some of it, lighting and ventilation. We heard about the ventilation projects a couple years back from Honeywell. And I think what we as a district, at least me personally, is learning that making our buildings better, more able to weather the storm of future things like COVID, anything that we can do as a board in a district to allow us to be more flexible moving forward is really important. And I know that the ventilation wasn't necessarily a showstopper this time, but we also know that the comfort of our students and the ability to have a better, healthier environment is key. And I think that it's an appropriate time to consider this question. And again, we'll need to figure out once we know the numbers, whether we want to go it or not. I think that to get to Shannon's point, education is going to be key. And this is not asking for a new SAU building. This is not asking for some other thing that maybe we get by with another. This is a living part of our buildings that I think we owe it to residents to really pay attention to. So that's one of the reasons I'm pushing this time and see how it works. And then we as a board will have to make a decision. But I'd rather have all the data in front of us of what the what ifs are.
So Matt, is that something you can get to us by Thursday? Because we have another work session continuation on Thursday. Is anyone opposed to that?
Can you just could someone just articulate like the things that Matt would need? Because like we've said, there are some things that we won't be able to tell you about, like stipulations on future money and whatever. But so what if somebody could just enumerate the things that Matt would actually need to be working on? Because it's not clear to me what work he would be being asked to do. That's the only thing.
So it's my understanding that it's a lease purchase for a good chunk of the ventilation.
Essentially addressing I think what was discussed is the 4 million number we've thrown around. I think it also represents, Matt, what you have on the 10-year CIP, the highest hit ones. So I think the request is a lease purchase, sort of a sketch anyway, of what a lease purchase would be for the first year and subsequent years to be able to address those $4 million worth of higher risk areas.
Yeah, yeah, I'm pretty sure I could get that. So an amortization schedule for a lease purchase agreement for $4 million.
But Cinda, I don't want to butt in, but we don't need this by Thursday necessarily, because this is a warrant article we'd be talking about.
Sure.
It's not operating budget. We got to close the operating budget by next week so we can give it to the budget committee. The warrant articles we got a little bit of roadway on.
No, you're totally right. We would just have to be committed to putting it into a warrant, not the operating budget, by Thursday. So that's why I requested that information in case the board felt uncomfortable with that and needed to make sure we got a chunk of it into the operating budget.
Yep, I agree.
So there's that. So basically, so Matt just summarized one of the things. Would there be anything else related to that, task that just so that we're making sure, like if Matt's going to be talking to Jen, then better to get all the questions, now so that he can be able to do that and provide the board with answers. So is there anything else related to that, or is the primary thing the cost of the lease purchase?
For me, it would be also the, compared to the cost of a bond. Like I'd want to see them side by side. So that, I don't know, Andy, is that what you were going to say?
But no. That's certainly valid. The individual cost that's in the CIP versus a lease purchase versus a bond, those three options sitting side by each. But also the other piece to get to Mark's point, what Honeywell will project the time frame to do this installation of all that would be. Because I know we were talking before, he says properly managed, we work all year round and we could do it in 2 years. So get a ballpark idea, like if we did this, will we do it within a 3-year period, or what do we think the ballpark would be? Because if we're going to ask for all the money up front, we want to know how long it'll take to use money. If it's going to take 10 years to do it, then why do a bond, right? But if you can do it all in 2 to 3 years, then you show the advantage in how we're trying to get it up front. So,
Lori, did you hear him?
So I was just going to say, and Matt, when you do the capital improvement plan and you have all the spend outs, going to Shannon's point, I think that, if we could show in a graph like that, the savings, why are we doing this? Because I think that would, just having that visual for people to see the reason that we're pushing to go this way, this is what we would save each year or over a 10-year period.
Yeah, I think for the bond schedule, I think I did a 10-year. The CIP is 10-year.
Right.
I would probably keep that. If this is a comparative exercise, we could stretch the lease period out if you want to in the end. But I would probably just do 10-year, 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 just so you could see it all. Does that make any sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
With term.
Yeah, the term. That way it's apples and apples. If you do a lease that's 3 years or something like that, then
what you're looking
right,
I won't
exactly.
know what I'm looking at either. And then time frame for completion. Okay.
Jenny, you haven't said anything. What do you think about all this stuff?
So I'm listening. I'm doing a lot of listening. I see all sides of it. I think that I'm inclined to lean towards kind of what you said, like the bond up front, or the bond or lease or something that allows us to do more sooner. That's in general what I'm inclined to. As far as the warrant, I'm inclined, I don't know if it goes that direction. I don't know, allow it to go to the taxpayers, but I don't know. See how it all hashes out. I feel a little overwhelmed by all that information if I'm being totally honest.
I mean, if we do a lease, it has to go on a. I mean, frankly, the only thing that wouldn't go on a warrant is if we decide to bake it 1 year in the operating budget. That'd be the only way it wouldn't be a warrant. Otherwise, it'd be one of the two. So, yeah.
Right. All right. So we'll be looking for some more information on Thursday's meeting. Yeah, definitely.
At the risk of, I just want to be 100% clear on our assignment, because I don't want to not come back. So can I just say one more time what it is, just so that it's what would a lease purchase cost first year and subsequent years, side-by-side comparisons, what Honeywell projects as a time frame for this, and then savings over a 10-year period, and have 10 years be the term for all the different options. Those things are the assignment for Thursday that will help the board, So that's accurate?
Sounds accurate to me.
Okay.
Yeah, that's my expectation. So
already working on it.
Okay, great. So having said that, I mean, I know we will want to review that obviously on Thursday. Is there anything else that the board wants to discuss as it relates to the budget for our working session today, or do we want to resume with that piece on Thursday and then finalize our working session? Shannon?
What I would have to say is in prior years, we always gave a little guidance as to how we felt the number presented in the budget book was as compared to what the board needed or felt that it needed to present to the taxpayers to get it passed. And with that, I just wanted to kind of conclude that this year we actually are doing, we have a leaner budget than last year because of things that were discussed in prior meetings, such as the increase in health insurance, the guaranteed maximum rate at 9.3%, the increase in the New Hampshire retirement burden to the Merrimack School District, because again, in 2010, the state no longer took a participating role in funding that and sent it down to the local school districts in town budgets. So with that, our number went up considerably. So that meant that sacrifices were made in the operating budget as it relates to delivering direct education. So with that, I'm very comfortable with what was presented. And other than the adjustment that Andy made, which I happily seconded, to adjust Brentwood downward a bit, I'm quite comfortable with what we've put together.
Andy and then Lori.
Yeah, I was actually gonna say that. So to amplify Shannon's point, just so people understand, if you look at the amount of money extra that the school district has to pay simply for the retirement and the healthcare increases is $1.656 million more we have to pay versus last year. The change in operating budget is $1.173 million. Now we've got some savings on bonded debt where we lost the was the high school edition. I think it's the last thing we paid off. But also remember, this is the third year of the increases for the teachers' contract, right? So the fact that I believe that we've been given like close to $2 million or more in increases for an increase of about half of that much in terms of the operating budget, which means that within the district, we've absorbed half of the increases that have been handed to us, essentially. So from that perspective, anything else that we did to try to bring the budget down to be flat would start to be cutting things. Now, I know in previous years, there have been questions about doing significant cuts and changes to the way that we teach, the way we deliver. But I think given what we've learned this year and what the budget has in terms of trying to address some of the COVID challenges, knowing that we'll have some level of those going into next year, that this may not be the year that we want to start really making major changes. Future boards will have to decide how to go through. But I think for this year, what we know, some stability around what we deliver and try to control our costs as much through what's already been done is about as good as we're going to get. And with the exception of the couple things we talked about tonight that we still need to discuss. So.
Okay. Did I see, Lori, did you have your hand up? Oh, Jenna.
So I just was hoping, I know we've talked about student population trends, and I was hoping if we could get a printout of like, just the trends from like 2018 to 2019, 2019 to 2020, 20 to 2021, what are those population trends from K through 12? And just so we can look at our past and where we're going.
Those are in the front of our budget book, I believe.
I didn't even see that. Okay.
Okay, good.
Right after the budget summary, it is 2 pages after that. So if you look at the budget summary,
Yep.
you look at the last page, then it's got the elementary school, and then the next one is the huge projection chart that talks about staffing or population history through.
Oh, I see it. Okay.
And then you got 5 years after that. So.
Right, that's exactly what I wanted. Thank you.
Perfect.
Cool.
And Matt, before I forget, can you make sure that we get this draft of the warrant articles available for people online?
Oh, sure.
It's not already there. And then Jenna, I saw your hand up.
I was just going to say that Andy said exactly what I was going to say about this budget, is that I think that everyone across the board did an incredible job of keeping it level funding, keeping it based strictly on need and not wants, and not even, I just really strictly focused on that. And that if we were to cut much more, like Andy said, we'd really start talking about cutting things that matter. And so right now, I was just really thrilled to see that the administration did a really great job of doing that. And, Andy just took the words right out of my mouth. All night long, actually.
I was going to say, I haven't been able to shut up all night, so, it's whatever.
But that's why I've been quiet, because, every time I think of something, you're like, oh, somebody else says it. I'm like, no need to speak tonight.
All right. So anything else we need to talk about tonight as it relates to the budget, or are we ready to resume? Let Matt go back and do his homework and resume on Thursday. Okay, then we will move on. The next item on the agenda is the public comments on agenda items. Shannon, do we have any public comments that have come in? Two?
I just saw two come in. Let me make sure it's one, and they both have addresses. So let me do that. So we will start with Merrimack School Board. Is there a reason why these meetings are no longer on Facebook Live? We struggle with attendance for these meetings. Making access to these meetings could assist with public awareness. Please reconsider putting these meetings back on Facebook Live. Thank you. Andy Hunter, 15 Mountain View Drive, Merrimack. And the next is from Sarah Hunter, also 15 Mountain View Drive, Merrimack. 176 million is coming to the state as education COVID relief. Maybe you should wait and see what we get before adding a bunch of warrant articles. With COVID, food insecurities, businesses closing, and many families struggling, this is not the year to ask the taxpayers for more. Thank you, Andy Schneider, for speaking up. Sarah Hunter, 15 Mountain View Drive.
Okay.
I just have a comment on the Facebook Live. Is the reason it's not Facebook Live because this is on a Tuesday, not a Monday? Does anybody know? I need Nancy Rose is on the line.
No, can I speculate?
Why not?
Well, I had a conversation with one of the guys over at Merrimack TV this week, and and this came up, and I think one of the things was the reliability issue. With so many people and their interests with COVID and whatever, Facebook Live the format was not supporting that. So it kept crashing. So people were getting mad because they were trying to put it on Facebook Live and it kept crashing. It is still available on their website. It's still available on their YouTube channel, I think. Maybe that might not be till the next day. I'm a little afraid to speak too authoritatively to it because I'm no expert. You can now watch it on Apple TV or on Roku. And there's directions on the Merrimack TV Facebook page for anybody who wants to do that. And every time there's a meeting, they put all the different ways you can watch it on there. So anyone with an internet connection can go right to their website and watch the meetings. So they don't have to do it on Facebook Live. But Facebook wasn't a reliable platform for them. It just kept crashing. And therefore, it was hurting their brand. And it was also frustrating taxpayers who thought it was our fault, and at times literally saying it was purposeful to try to keep the meetings away from access to people. So it was counterproductive, and I think that's why they stopped. They did it because of COVID out of necessity, and I think that they've now tried to find a more reliable way to deliver those meetings. And I think they've done a really good job of that.
Yes, if I could just say, I want to just follow up on that. I think, Jenny, you're absolutely right from my understanding. I understand also that the internet may have dropped tonight for a period of time, which might have, added to the challenge of viewing tonight. But I want to just offer thanks to Merrimack TV. They have been asked to do, an unbelievable amount of work to cover, a lot of things remotely, sporting events and other public events. And I don't know how much more we could ask of Merrimack TV than they've been able to do to provide a community service for us. So I think the platform issue, they've been working really, really hard to try to have a reliable platform, as Jenna said. And I think it's also right to say that, and I don't want to speak for the board, but this really has nothing to do with the board.
No.
This has to do with Merrimack TV and its abilities and maybe even some limitations. But with that, I can't think of another organization that's been more helpful to the cause of communication than Merrimack TV. So
Yeah, Nick at Merrimack TV would be absolutely happy to address that. If anyone who has concerns about that could call Nick directly at Merrimack TV or email him, and he will explain it to you better than I can. And he is he's excellent, and he's very, very good at what he does, and happy to answer questions.
So I would just say, let's just reach out to them, and if they're hearing it now, so they may very well address it just automatically, but they do have the Facebook page where they can put another update as to some of the constraints and what their process is going forward, so that, folks that want to listen or, understand, kind of what the approach is going forward and any other reasons for it. So we can just ask them to do that. Mark, maybe through the administrative office, if you could just, if we don't see anything, just, they can get some messaging out.
And whether we redirect it from the district Facebook page to remind folks, hey, there's a meeting tonight, and if you want to watch it, here's where to go. I mean,
Yep, that's a great idea.
Just raise awareness. That'd be great.
Yep, perfect. Okay, well, now that we are through public comments, I will entertain a motion to go into non-public session per RSA 91-A:3, Roman numeral 2, A, B, and C. Do I have a motion made by Shannon, seconded by Andy? Lori, how do you vote? In
Yes.
favor? Okay. Shannon?
In favor.
Jenna?
In favor.
And Andy?
In favor.
And I also vote in favor. So the motion carries 5-0-0. Thank you, everyone, and good night.
Merrimack TV is committed to our community. From gavel-to-gavel coverage of town and school board meetings to updates on town services and projects, we aim to keep you connected.
Good morning, I'm Kyle Fox, Public Works Director for the town of Merrimack.
Hi, I'm Diane Trippett. I'm the town clerk tax collector for the town of Merrimack.
I'm Captain Matt Tarleton with the Merrimack, New Hampshire Police Department.
And keep the public informed of every motion.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
And many moments, so you can be confident that we're here for you. Thanks for watching. Stay connected. Follow Merrimack TV on Facebook.